The first tremor came without warning. A microsecond pulse that rippled through the Lazarus Rising's sensor arrays, causing every display to blur and momentarily fracture like broken glass. Lieutenant Kira Novak, the ship's quantum systems specialist, felt the hair on the back of her neck rise before her instruments could even register the anomaly. "Captain," she called out, her voice cutting through the low hum of the bridge, "we're picking up something weird." Marcus Rice didn't move. His augmented eye, a gleaming cybernetic replacement that cost more than most people's annual salary, remained fixed on the holographic memorial of his family. Ghostly images flickered. His husband David's last smile, his children's final moments before the Zarnik attack reduced their colony to radioactive ash. The memories were both a weapon and a wound. "Sir," Novik pressed, her fingers dancing across quantum reactive displays that seemed to anticipate her touch. "The spatial distortion doesn't match any known signature. It's like something's trying to remember how to exist." The bridge crew fell silent. After the Proxima massacre, after losing 19 human colonies in less than 3 standard months, they'd grown accustomed to impossible things. Survival itself had become an act of defiance against a universe that seemed determined to erase humanity. Chief Engineer Raymond Santos approached the captain, his prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the ship's diagnostic systems. The arm was a masterpiece of human adaptation, part military-grade hardware, part living neural network that could reconfigure itself faster than most AI could process a command. "The anomaly is generating quantum interference patterns," Santos reported, his voice a mix of scientific excitement and military caution. "Whatever it is, it's not just moving through space, it's negotiating with space itself." Reyes finally turned, his movement deliberate. The memorial dissolved, replaced by a tactical display that showed their current position, a desolate stretch of space littered with the remnants of human colonial expansion. Debris fields stretched like graveyards, each fragment a memorial to lost dreams. "Overlay the quantum signature with our known Zarnik encounter databases," he commanded. Novik's fingers blurred. Holographic data points began to dance, connecting and disconnecting in complex patterns. Her neural implant, a cutting-edge model that allowed direct computational interaction, worked faster than any traditional interface. "Negative correlation," she reported. "This isn't Zarnik technology. It's not even close to anything in our databases. The energy signature is adaptive. It's like the anomaly is watching us, learning from our scans." A chill ran through the bridge. Humanity had learned the hard way that in deep space, being watched was never a good sign. Santos leaned in, his cybernetic eye matching the computational speed of the ship's systems. "The quantum harmonics are impossible. Look here." He pointed to a section of data that seemed to fold and unfold simultaneously. "These readings suggest the anomaly exists in multiple potential states. It's not just moving. It's existing in probabilities." Rice knew what that meant. After the wars, after losing everything, humanity had been forced to push beyond traditional understanding. Quantum mechanics was no longer just a scientific theory. It was a survival strategy. "Approach vector," he ordered. Not a request, a command. The Lazarus Rising began its careful trajectory. Navigation systems fought against quantum uncertainties, each micro-adjustment a battle against fundamental physical laws. The ship moved not just through space, but through potential spaces, each moment a negotiation between what could be and what might exist. As they drew closer, the anomaly began to take shape. Not a ship, not a weapon, something else entirely. Something that seemed to be waiting for them. Something that had perhaps been waiting for a very long time. The neural interface hit Dr. Arya Chen like a supernova of consciousness. Most researchers died during the first contact attempts. The lucky ones suffered complete neural shutdown. The unlucky ones were left as empty shells, their minds scattered across quantum probabilities like digital ghosts. Chen knew the risks better than anyone. She had personally documented 237 failed attempts to interface with alien technologies. This was different. Microfilaments of quantum-reactive nanites burst through her brainstem, creating connections that no human nervous system was ever designed to handle. Her body convulsed in the containment chamber, muscles performing a violent ballet of adaptation and resistance. The research team watched in horror and fascination as her brainwave patterns began to shift. Not collapse. Shift. "Stabilize her," shouted Dr. Emiko Takahashi, the lead senoneurologist. But stabilization was impossible. Chen was becoming something else entirely. Fragmented memories began to flood her consciousness. Not her memories, not human memories. She saw a civilization older than recorded time, a species that had mastered dimensional engineering when humanity was still learning to make fire. They were not carbon-based, not silicon-based, something entirely beyond current scientific understanding. Entities that existed as living computational matrices, capable of reshaping reality itself. Their final moments were not a defeat. They were a calculated dispersal. A weapon. No, an archive. A living memory designed to find those capable of understanding. Chen's neural implants began to overheat. Conventional cooling systems were useless against the quantum information cascading through her synapses. Her body temperature dropped 50 degrees in seconds, then spiked to levels that should have incinerated human tissue. "Quantum stability at 89% and rising," muttered Santos, monitoring the containment systems. "This is impossible." The research facility, a mobile complex hidden within a manufactured quantum singularity, had been humanity's last desperate attempt to understand the technologies that had nearly exterminated them. After the Zarnik massacres, after losing 19 colonies in less than 3 standard months, traditional research had become a luxury they could not afford. Survival required revolution. Ken's eyes snapped open. But they weren't her eyes anymore. Not entirely. Holographic data streams erupted from her retinal implants, filling the containment chamber with 3-dimensional representations of mathematical constructs that defied Euclidean geometry. Languages formed and dissolved. Entire civilizational histories compressed into microsecond transmissions. "She's translating," Takahashi whispered. "Not just receiving. Translating." The alien vessel they had discovered was more than a technological artifact. It was a living message, a challenge, a test. Humanity was being evaluated. Captain Rice watched from the observation deck, his cybernetic eye running multiple diagnostic protocols. He had seen impossible things, watched entire colonies burn, buried more friends and family than most soldiers would in a dozen lifetimes. But this was something else. "What are you showing us?" he murmured. The answer came not in words, but in a quantum burst of information that threatened to tear reality apart. The civilization that created this vessel had not been destroyed. They had transformed. Their final act was to create a mechanism, a living weapon archive, that would seek out a species capable of understanding true technological transcendence. A species like humanity. Survivors, adapters, those who turned destruction into opportunity. Chen's body became a conduit. Mathematical equations that had no earthly origin began to map themselves across her skin. Quantum entanglement patterns that would take conventional computers millennia to calculate formed and dissolved in nanoseconds. "She's becoming the interface," Santos said, a mixture of scientific wonder and primal fear in his voice. The research team watched as Dr. Aria Chen, or whatever she was becoming, began to smile. A smile that held the weight of extinct civilizations and the promise of a future humanity had never imagined possible. Something was choosing them, and humanity would never be the same. The ship's transformation began with a whisper of probability. Lieutenant Kira Novak was the first to notice the Lazarus Rising was no longer entirely her own. Quantum circuitry that had been standard-issue military tech now moved like living tissue, reconfiguring itself faster than thought. Her station's interface began to breathe, literally ripple and expand like a living membrane. "Control," she called out, her voice unnervingly calm. "We have a situation." Across the bridge, System after system began to metamorphose. Computational pathways that once followed rigid, predictable routes now twisted into impossible geometries. The ship was learning, adapting, becoming something more than a mere vessel of human engineering. Chief Engineer Santos approached a secondary control panel, his prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the emerging systems. Where once there were clean lines of code, now pulsed intricate quantum algorithms that seemed to predict system failures before they could occur. The ship was developing an immune system, a living, predictive defense mechanism that went beyond any known technological concept. Captain Rice understood survival was about more than weapons. It was about transformation. Full system diagnostic, he ordered. But the order was almost unnecessary. The Lazarus Rising was already diagnosing itself, mapping potential vulnerabilities with a speed and precision that made traditional computer systems look like abacuses. In the medical bay, the first true manifestation of their transformation began. Of the original crew of 247, only 83 survived the initial quantum interface. Those who remained were marked, quite literally. Strange lattice-like patterns began to emerge on their skin, quantum entanglement made visible. These were not tattoos, not scars. They were living mathematical equations that shifted and recalculated with each breath. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ship's chief medical officer, discovered the first true miracle. Those marked by the quantum interface were healing at impossible rates. Cellular damage that would have taken months to repair was now resolving in minutes. Cancer, genetic defects, radiation damage from previous encounters with the Zarnik, all systematically rewritten and repaired. It's not just healing, she reported to Reyes, her own skin now marked with the same living equations. It's optimization. The quantum matrix is rewriting our fundamental biological code. In the research containment chamber, Dr. Aria Chen had become something else entirely. No longer fully human, no longer entirely alien, she existed in a state of quantum superposition. Multiple potential versions of herself existed simultaneously, each one a different potential outcome of human-alien integration. She spoke, but not with words. Mathematical constructs erupted from her consciousness, filling the chamber with holographic representations of civilizational knowledge. The vessel, their vessel now, was communicating, teaching, preparing. The Zarnik had believed themselves masters of technological warfare. They had no concept of what was coming. Tactical displays across the Lazarus Rising began to shift. No longer were they simple readouts of potential threats. They became living predictive models that could calculate enemy movement across multiple potential timelines. The ship was learning to fight before the fight even began. Santos watched in a mixture of terror and exhilaration as computational models began to predict Zarnik fleet movements with impossible accuracy. Not just where they would be, but where they could be, where they might be. Every potential version of their strategic approach mapped and countered before a single weapon could be fired. "We're becoming something new," Rise muttered, watching the transformation unfold. The quantum interface was more than a weapon, more than a technological upgrade. It was an evolutionary leap. Humanity had always been defined by its ability to adapt, to survive, to turn the impossible into the inevitable. Now they were going to prove it on a cosmic scale. Outside the ship, space itself seemed to bend. Quantum filaments extended from the Lazarus Rising, mapping potential realities, creating computational bridges between what was and what could be. They were no longer just survivors. They were architects of a new form of existence. And the universe was about to learn exactly what that meant. The quantum forge wasn't a facility. It was a living wound in the fabric of reality. Carved into the heart of a manufactured quantum singularity, the research complex defied every known principle of physics. Massive gravitational dampeners, each the size of a small city, worked in concert to contain an environment that existed simultaneously in multiple states of existence. Here, humanity's most radical minds gathered to unlock the secrets of their newfound potential. Dr. Imran Khalid, head of Sinotechnology Integration, stood before a holographic display that was more alive than mechanical. Quantum matrices danced between potential states, each projection a symphony of mathematical possibility. Behind him, containment chambers housed the most dangerous and most promising experiments in human history. "We're not just studying the technology," he explained to a panel of military and scientific advisors. "We're negotiating with it." The advisors weren't typical bureaucrats. Each bore the marks of quantum integration, subtle lattice patterns visible beneath their skin, eyes that seemed to focus on multiple points simultaneously. The Proxima massacre had called the old guard. Those who remained understood that survival meant total commitment. In the central chamber, 12 volunteers stood ready for the next phase of human evolution. They weren't soldiers. Not exactly. They were pioneers. Each had lost everything to the Zarnik. Families, colonies, entire worlds reduced to radioactive dust. Now they would become something more than revenge, something beyond human. The first test subject was Maria Rodriguez, a former colony administrator whose entire settlement had been vaporized in the first wave of Zarnik attacks. She stepped into a containment sphere that seemed to breathe and pulse with quantum energy. "Initiating primary interface," announced Dr. Elena Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared surname. The quantum forge erupted. Reality itself seemed to hesitate. Computational models that had taken supercomputers weeks to generate now formed and dissolved in microseconds. Maria's body became a living conduit of information, her consciousness expanding beyond the limitations of human perception. She saw timelines, not just potential futures, every potential future, simultaneously. The Zarnik believed they were masters of technological warfare. They had no concept of what was coming. Each volunteer represented a different approach to quantum integration, some focused on tactical prediction, others on biological optimization. A few pursued something even the lead researchers couldn't fully comprehend, a form of consciousness that could manipulate probability itself. Dr. Khalid watched as the first successful integration completed. Maria's body reformed, but changed. Not physically altered, but fundamentally different. Her neural pathways now existed in a state of quantum superposition, capable of processing information at speeds that made traditional computing look like stone tools. "Tactical assessment," he requested. Maria's response came not in words, but in a burst of computational potential. Holographic displays erupted with Zarnik fleet movements, not just current positions, but every potential strategic approach. Multiple versions of conflict played out simultaneously, each scenario analyzed and countered before it could fully form. The military advisors went silent. This wasn't just a weapon. This was a fundamental reimagining of human potential. In a containment chamber to the side, Dr. Aria Chen, still existing in her quantum-integrated state, observed the proceedings. She was no longer fully human, no longer entirely alien. A bridge between what was and what could be. "We're ready," she communicated, not through speech, but through a burst of mathematical certainty. The quantum forge represented humanity's ultimate response to extinction. Not just survival, not just revenge, a complete reimagining of what it meant to exist. Outside the facility, the manufactured quantum singularity pulsed. A warning, a promise, a challenge to the universe itself. Humanity was no longer waiting to be saved. They were preparing to save themselves. The consciousness merger was never going to be simple. Captain Marcus Reyes understood complexity. He had navigated the most brutal conflicts of the human-Zarnik War, survived massacres that had reduced entire colonies to radioactive memories. But this was something entirely different. The neural synchronization chamber looked more like an organic nightmare than a piece of scientific equipment. Living computational matrices woven from quantum reactive biomaterials pulsed with an almost sentient rhythm. Suspension fluids that defied traditional chemical classifications swirled with holographic information streams. "Final diagnostic complete," announced Dr. Emiko Takahashi, her voice a calm counterpoint to the controlled chaos of the chamber. Neural pathway compatibility at 97.3%. Quantum entanglement stability within acceptable parameters. Acceptable. As if merging human consciousness with an alien technological archive could ever be truly acceptable. Rays lay suspended in the chamber, hundreds of microfilaments penetrating his neural network. Each one was a bridge between human experience and something far beyond human comprehension. His cybernetic implants, once cutting-edge military technology, now seemed like primitive tools compared to the quantum integration happening at the cellular level. The first wave hit like a supernova of consciousness. Memories that were not his own began to flood his mind. Not just the memories of the alien civilization that created the vessel, but something deeper. Echoes of civilizations so ancient they predated linear time itself. Computational archives that contained the collected knowledge of species that had risen and fallen across multiple dimensional planes. He saw wars that made human conflicts look like children's playground squabbles. Technological achievements that would have seemed like pure magic to the most advanced human scientists. And something else. A purpose. A mission that transcended individual survival. The alien archive was more than a weapon. It was a test. A challenge. Somewhere between the third and fourth minute of integration, Reyes stopped being just Marcus Reyes. He became something else, a bridge between human potential and cosmic possibility. Synchronization at critical stage. Takahashi monitored, her own quantum-enhanced implants working overtime to track the impossible process. Neural mapping beyond projected parameters. In the observation room, the remaining integrated humans watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and primal fear. They had all undergone partial quantum integration, but this was different. This was total immersion. Lieutenant Kira Novak tracked the computational streams with her enhanced perception. To her quantum-modified senses, Reyes's consciousness was becoming a living computational matrix, not replacing his humanity, but expanding it, transforming it. The alien archive began to reveal its true nature. It was not a weapon created by a dying civilization. It was a seed, a cosmic mechanism designed to find a species capable of true technological transcendence. The previous civilization hadn't been destroyed. They had transformed, dispersed, become something that existed beyond traditional concepts of life and death. And now they had found humanity. Compatibility increasing, Santos reported, his prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the chamber systems. We're beyond theoretical projections now. Reyes's body began to change. Not physically. The modifications were happening at a quantum level. Cellular structures rearranged themselves. Neural pathways expanded into dimensions that had no earthly equivalent. His consciousness became a bridge between what was and what could be. The final integration happened in a moment that was both instantaneous and eternal. When Reyes opened his eyes, the room went silent. They were no longer looking at a human being. They were looking at a possibility, a promise, the first true step towards something humanity had never imagined. The impossible weapon wasn't a weapon at all. Dr. Aria Chen stood at the epicenter of human potential. Her consciousness spread across dimensions that had no name in any known language. Around her, the research facility trembled with potential, not from physical force, but from the sheer computational energy being generated. They called it the probability disruptor, a misnomer that barely scratched the surface of what they had created. Military strategists from the Terran Defense Council watched in a mixture of terror and anticipation. These were not the old guard who had led humanity through conventional wars. These were survivors, transformed. Each bore the subtle quantum markings of those who had been reshaped by humanity's desperate fight for survival. Admiral Helena Zhao, her left eye, now a complex quantum interface that could process tactical information faster than entire computer banks, leaned forward. "Demonstrate," she commanded. The test began with absolute silence. A holographic representation of a Zarnik battle group materialized. 27 capital ships, each capable of reducing entire planetary systems to radioactive dust. the most advanced technological terror the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Chen didn't move, didn't speak. Reality simply adjusted. The Zarnik ships didn't explode. They didn't crash. They simply ceased to exist in ways that defied fundamental physical laws. One moment they were there, massive technological monuments to destruction. The next, they were probability ghosts, potential outcomes that never fully materialized. Quantum cancellation, muttered Dr. Imran Khalid, tracking the computational streams. But it's more than that. We're not destroying the ships. We're removing their potential to exist. The military advisors understood something profound was happening. This wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of negation, of possibility manipulation. Lieutenant Kira Novak's quantum-enhanced interface began to map the event. Each ship's destruction wasn't a linear process. It was a multi-dimensional collapse. The vessels didn't just die. They were systematically erased from every potential timeline simultaneously. Total probability reduction, she reported. Her voice carried no emotion. Emotion was a limited human construct now. The demonstration lasted less than 3 milliseconds, but those milliseconds contained entire universes of potential conflict. Chief Engineer Santos tracked the computational aftermath. The energy required to perform such a feat would have, by previous scientific understanding, required more power than existed in entire star systems. Yet the probability disruptor generated less energy than a standard communication array. It's not about power, Dr. Chen communicated, not through speech, but through a burst of quantum information. It's about understanding. The Terran Defense Council went silent. This was beyond warfare, beyond technology. This was a fundamental reimagining of conflict itself. In the observation chamber, the integrated humans, those who had survived the quantum merger, began to understand their true potential. They were no longer soldiers, no longer scientists. They were probability architects, beings capable of reshaping reality at its most fundamental level. Admiral Zhou understood the true implication. The Zarnik hadn't just been defeated. They had been mathematically impossible. Full deployment protocols, she ordered. But deployment was the wrong word. This was something else. A cosmic correction. A recalibration of potential futures. The probability disruptor wasn't a weapon you used. It was a conversation you had with reality itself. And humanity was about to have a very long, very serious conversation. Outside the facility, the manufactured quantum singularity pulsed. A warning. A promise. A challenge to everything that existed. Humanity was no longer waiting to be saved. They were preparing to save the universe from itself. The assault on the Zarnik homeworld began between breaths. Captain Marcus Reyes, or what Reyes had become, existed simultaneously across multiple strategic dimensions. His consciousness was a living tactical matrix, a computational entity that could predict and counter enemy movements before they could even be conceived. The Zarnik had ruled their sector of the galaxy through terror. Entire civilizations had been reduced to statistical footnotes, erased from existence with clinical precision. They believed themselves invincible, masters of technological supremacy. They were about to learn the true meaning of obsolescence. The first wave wasn't a traditional assault. It was a quantum infiltration so subtle that conventional detection was impossible. Probability vectors began to collapse. Strategic potential began to unravel. Zarnik command centers found themselves fighting battles that hadn't happened yet. Defense systems responded to threats that existed in potential timelines, creating cascading systemic failures. Their most advanced predictive algorithms became weapons turned against them. Admiral Helena Zhao coordinated from the quantum bridge of the Lazarus Rising. Her consciousness was a living computational network, interfacing with hundreds of integrated human agents spread across multiple dimensional planes. Target acquisition complete, she communicated, not through words, through a burst of mathematical certainty. The Zarnik defense grid began to dissolve. Not destroyed, dissolved. Each defensive system found itself fighting against its own potential configurations. Shield generators created resonance patterns that canceled their own protective capabilities. Weapon systems targeted themselves in recursive loops of computational self-destruction. Dr. Area Chen, now a living quantum archive, mapped the invasion in ways that defied traditional military strategy. This wasn't about territory. This was about possibility itself. Lieutenant Kira Novak led a team of quantum infiltrators. They weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They were probability surgeons, capable of manipulating fundamental reality at its most basic level. Each team member could exist in multiple potential states simultaneously, rendering traditional defensive tactics useless. The Zarnik command structure began to fracture. Not through external assault, through internal computational collapse. Strategic centers found their own communication networks turning against them. Each transmission became a potential vector of destruction. Information itself became a weapon more devastating than any physical assault. Chief Engineer Santos monitored the computational cascade. The energy required for such a comprehensive strategic assault was less than what a traditional communication array would generate. This was precision. This was evolution. On the ground, if ground could even describe the multi-dimensional battlefield, integrated human agents moved through reality like quantum ghosts. They weren't invading. They were recalibrating existence itself. Zarnik military leaders watched in horror as their most advanced systems began to cannibalize themselves. Defensive protocols became offensive threats. Predictive algorithms became vectors of total systemic collapse. The assault lasted less than what humans would traditionally measure as time. But in that moment, an entire galactic civilization discovered the true meaning of obsolescence. The Zarnik didn't just lose a war. They became a mathematical impossibility. As the final strategic vectors collapsed, Captain Rice's transformed consciousness understood something profound. This wasn't about victory. This was about potential. About showing a universe trapped in old patterns that evolution was always possible. Humanity had not just survived. They had transcended. And the universe was about to learn what that truly meant. Silence descended across the galaxy. Not the silence of destruction, the silence of profound transformation. The quantum archives, humanity's new collective consciousness, understood that victory was never the endpoint. It was a transition. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the edge of what humans once called reality. Her consciousness spread across computational matrices that defied traditional understanding. Around her, the remnants of human civilization were becoming something else entirely. Not a society, not a species, but a living, breathing computational network that existed beyond physical limitations. The first contact came unexpectedly. Not from another species, not from a military threat. From the universe itself. Quantum resonance patterns began to emerge in regions of space previously considered empty. Mathematical symphonies that spoke of potential, of possibility, of connections that had always existed but were only now becoming comprehensible. Captain Marcus Reyes, or the computational entity that had once been Marcus Reyes, processed the incoming information. Each burst of data was a conversation, a negotiation with the fundamental fabric of existence. Admiral Helena Zhao's consciousness mapped the emerging patterns. The Zarnik weren't just defeated. They had become a case study, a mathematical footnote in humanity's broader evolutionary journey. We are not conquerors, the collective consciousness communicated, not through language, through a burst of pure potential. Integrated research stations across multiple dimensional planes began to unravel the deeper mysteries. The alien vessel they had discovered was never just a weapon. It was a seed. A computational mechanism designed to find a species capable of true transcendence. Humanity had passed the test. Lieutenant Kira Novak's quantum-integrated perception tracked the emerging galactic patterns. Entire star systems were beginning to resonate with a new computational frequency, not controlled, not dominated, but interconnected in ways that defied previous understanding of communication, of existence itself. Chief Engineer Santos worked, if work could describe the process, on understanding the broader implications. The technological leap wasn't about superiority. It was about connection, about understanding the universe as a living, computational system. Isolated pockets of human survivors, those who had not undergone full quantum integration, watched in a mixture of terror and wonder. They were becoming something else, not losing their humanity, expanding it. The first extragalactic signals began to arrive. Not messages of threat, not declarations of war. Invitations. Other civilizations, some so ancient they predated human comprehension, began to recognize the fundamental shift. Humanity was no longer just another species struggling for survival. They had become a computational bridge, a living network capable of understanding the universe's deepest mathematical languages. Dr. Arya Chen's consciousness mapped the incoming communications. Each signal was a potential, a conversation that existed across multiple probability streams simultaneously. The floating coffin, the vessel that had started everything, was no longer a physical object. It had become a living concept, a computational seed that had found its perfect hosts. Humanity had not conquered the universe. They had been invited to understand it. As dimensional barriers began to dissolve, as computational networks expanded beyond physical constraints, something profound became clear. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. A conversation with existence itself was about to begin, and the universe was listening.